November 7th, 1914, when Tsingtao, the German possession in the Far East, China, had to surrender after a short period of sea blockade and weeks of siege to the joint British-Japanese armies, which outnumbered the around 5,000 defenders of Tsingtao more than 10 times. With the capture of Tsingtao, which the German Reich has taken in 1897 and established as naval base in the Far East of its Ostasien-Geschwader, around 4,500 German and 300 Austro-Hungarian combatants became prisoners of war, POWs, of the British and Japanese forces. Kaiser Wilhelm II had emphasized in the forefront, addressed to Alfred Meyer-Waldeck, that's the gentleman here, the German governor of Tsingtao, that it would be a greater shame, and that's a quote, a greater shame to lose Tsingtao to the Japanese than to lose Berlin to the Russians. And so the German soldiers were deeply ashamed of the fall of Tsingtao. No, sorry. For the Japanese authorities, the capture of Tsingtao in November 1914 caused a real challenge, and the first imprisonment of the enemy soldiers immediately after Tsingtao was fallen was nothing else than pure improvisation. German soldiers were rounded up on the spot, and some of them quartered in highly improvised accommodations. At least some German soldiers actually had to sleep under the open sky. Then, no wonder, the German POWs were in winter 1914 transported to Japan on board of 6 returning supply ships and simple coast steamers, what shows how unprepared the Japanese Empire was. Aboard these ships, the atmosphere among the German soldiers was dominated by a climate of depression after the humiliating defeat. Moreover, the German POWs suffered also worst conditions on board. The ships were massively overcrowded, so space and food were very limited. And this was causing also problems in terms of sanitariness. After their arrival in Japan, the German POWs housed at the beginning in very improvised camps in the main temple complexes or some buildings of the International Red Cross, located in mainly high-populated city centers, such as the temple district of Asakusa in Tokyo, before the POWs were transferred to peripheral areas, as in the case of Tokyo, from Asakusa, what is today a tourist spot, by the way, to Narashino. At the end of 1914, 12 POW camps were opened in Japan, and here you can see a list. While during the whole war, 16 POW camps were erected in Japan in total. All of them located in 3 of the 4 Japanese main islands, Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, but not on the most northern main island, Hokkaido, and I think in the main for climate reasons, the winters there are very harsh. According to a report of Johannes Barbed, a former inmate of POW camp Marugame, the here imprisoned 300 German soldiers were welcomed in a very friendly manner. The locals cheered at the entrance of Marugame village, which was decorated with flowers. Even an inscription was visible stating in German letters, quote, "Herzlichst und mitleidvollst willkommen," quote end. So stating a wholehearted welcome, but also that the German soldiers were arousing compassion on the Japanese side. Camp Marugame was, as most camps at the beginning of the war, only an improvised one. Here at the beautiful temple complex Shiyoya Betsuin Temple. But the temple ground was just too small to house all the POWs, and the camp was completely overcrowded. Food supply was insufficient, and at least some German stomachs were not used to washoku, this means Japanese food, what caused digestive problems. Only after protests of the German officers, the food rations increased and the POWs obtained permission to cook their own meals. Moreover, Potatoes, yes. Moreover, a cafeteria was opened to provide the POWs with fruits, sweets, but also cigarettes and beer. Very important for Germans. Yeah. However, from the beginning of 1915, reports exist which recorded bad camp conditions. And these lists, or these reports, are including the following things: insufficient food rations in the initial stage of the imprisonment, insufficient sanitary facilities, insufficient treatment of ill POWs, harassment of the POWs conducted by camp guards, and rejection or delay of the delivery of personal letters and goods of the inmates. Such kind of protest notes of German POWs were smuggled out of the camps and submitted in the main to the US side. And if you ask me how were the German POWs able to smuggle them out of the camp, please keep in mind that the Japanese Empire did not imprison German civilians. Vice versa, by the way, the German Reich imprisoned Japanese persons, Japanese students and so on in Germany. And many of these German civilians visited or were able to visit these POW camps, and it were these Germans who smuggled out these reports and presented them to the American embassy in the main. After international protests, the Japanese authorities opened camp doors to independent inspectors, mainly to those of the International Red Cross, but also to priests from Switzerland or Sweden, so neutral countries. No doubt that reports of these inspectors criticizing bad camp conditions resulted in the closure of POW camps such as Marugame, Matsuyama and Tokushima on Shikoku Island, and in further consequence it resulted in the opening of Camp Bando, located in the northeastern part of Shikoku in April 1917. Bando, which was the largest POW camp in Japan, housing around 1,100 POWs in total, was a purpose-built POW camp and offered much better camp conditions and accommodations. Before I present some particular insights into the everyday life in model camps such as Bando or Narashino, let me give here at this point just some additional general remarks about the treatment of POWs in World War I Japan in comparison to the Second World War in a way. So generally spoken, the treatment was according to international law, the Hague Convention. In great difference to the treatment of Allied soldiers who had to suffer as POWs in Japan during World War II, the German captives of the First World War became no forced laborers. Moreover, German POWs received from the Japanese authorities salaries which were adjusted to their military ranks accordingly and similar to the salary of Japanese soldiers. The POWs got also the opportunity of voluntary work to earn money, mainly in the production of civilian goods, so not for war production, yeah, only civilian production of civilian goods, and in the agricultural sector, the cultivation of land and farming, especially from the Japanese food crisis winter of 1917 on. Only a few reports about violation of international law exist from the time. According to the articles of the Hague Conventions, escapees shouldn't receive harsh treatment, but just light disciplinary punishment. However, the Japanese putting escapees under civilian law punished German soldiers harshly to discipline them. By the way, a method which was conducted even inside the Japanese army towards the own soldiers. And as far as I can see, the Japanese punished the POWs only in cases of really obvious insubordination and failed escape attempts for things German soldiers had done during these attempts, such as damaging property, stealing something, what resulted in heavy jail sentences. However, today the image of the treatment of German POWs in Japan during World War I is a very positive one. Main reason for this narrative is the history of POW Camp Bando and the personal behavior of its camp commander, Matsue Toyohisa, a human character who showed always understanding towards the POWs. Camp Bando, opened in April 1917, was an appropriate established POW camp, especially for the needs of the German soldiers, and was provided with a bunch of facilities such as barracks, kitchens and cookhouses, tool sheds, a sick bay, but also facilities to arrest disobedient inmates. Let's have a look on the everyday life in these POW camps. Generally spoken, at the beginning of the period of imprisonment in Japan, was the German POW's everyday life very boring. For the simple reason they had firstly just nothing to do in the afternoons. But the Japanese authorities introduced self-administration of the German soldiers in the camps, and the longer the time of captivity, the higher the time of activities in the POW camps. In Bando, Camp Commander Matsui gave the inmates all freedom to shape their own camp activities, which looked, seen from our perspective, like some kind of leisure activities, but was in fact their everyday life activity in the camp. The list is including diverse activities. So we are having, for example, lectures about Japan, the Japanese culture and language, but also on other topics such as geography, world history, etc. At this point, we also have to keep in mind the diversity among the German POWs. Many of these POWs were no regulars, meaning no regular soldiers, but had pursued diverse professions in real life. And so no wonder that the camp inmates gave also lectures just about their own occupations and jobs. Also, language lessons to improve language proficiency of the inmates were conducted. By the way, not only in Japanese, English, Chinese or French, but also in other languages, Dutch, Polish and so on and so forth. Even Japanese locals attended lessons, for example, about cooking German dishes, how to cultivate land, etc., as some kind of educational training. On the list, we are having also a bunch of cultural activities. Lots of music, camp orchestras were founded, and in particular, the Bando Orchestra became very famous. And Ludwig van Beethoven's 9th Symphony, Ode to Joy, Ode an die Freude, and the first sentence, all men become brothers, is taken from the Ode to Joy, had its Japan premiere in June 1918 in Camp Bando. Also, many theater groups existed, and lots of plays were brought on camp stages. On the list of performed plays are very classic plays of Schiller or Goethe, for example, Goethe's Faust, but also theater performances created by the POWs themselves. Also, some kind of written publications were produced. For example, Camp Bando had its own printing house and its own library. And here I can show you publication of cards with season greetings, which I found in the archives of the Siebold Museum in Würzburg, Germany. And as far as I know, some very rare Easter greetings from the camps Ninoshima and Bando. We are having a bunch of Christmas greeting cards, but I've seen these Easter greetings for the first time. Here, a very nice one with a rabbit entering Bando camp. Some of the camps produced their own newspapers. So the newspaper of Camp Bando was titled Die Baracke, the barracks. Drawings were published, as well as some kind of cartoons, and also painting became one of the inmates' activities. German soldiers were also allowed to do some kind of day trips to learn more about the surrounding area, but also about Japanese flora and fauna, as well as just to come in contact with locals. Maybe not that much surprising, among the activities was a lot of sports. Diverse physical training, you can see here gymnastics and weightlifting, tennis, but also athletics, wrestling, boxing, swimming. Here you can see rope climbing, the rope climber on the left. And of course, a bunch of team sports. Yeah? Germany as a soccer country, soccer or football, or hockey. Yeah? And real competitions took place in the camps. Moreover, diverse celebrations took place in the camps, and it is less surprising maybe that the soldiers celebrated Christmas. But the birthday of the German Kaiser, 27th January, became also a special day for the captives. And to be honest, I was much more surprised to learn that also the birthday of the Bavarian king, Ludwig III, 7th January, became a major cultural event in Bando. And I was surprised because not all of the inmates were from Bavaria. So, yeah. And on this particular day, a special evening event has taken place, including theater plays, special evening lecture, and a concert. One of the quite rare pictures I found in the Siebel Society's archive shows a funeral. And you see, the German soldiers got permission to bury their own soldiers with, we would say, full military honors when one of the inmates passed away because of illness. Also, real exhibitions have taken place, which became real major events on a local stage. At exhibitions, German soldiers, here you can see a leaflet, at exhibitions, German soldiers presented their own products, handcrafts, but also their arts, theater plays, music compositions, etc. to the local Japanese public. So, Bando became eventually a place of cultural exchange between Germans and Japanese, meaning German soldiers or POWs on the one hand, and Japanese on the other hand. And this is very important. Japanese means not only members of the Japanese military, so the camp guards, but also Japanese civilians. Let me finish with talking about the situation at the war end in the camps. In 1918, the last year of the war, many soldiers were under high psychological pressure and mentally ill. They were, and we shouldn't forget this point, they were unfree. Yeah? And despite all aforementioned activities, which look like leisure activities, camp life felt deadly monotonous. Persons of very different characters had to live together in the tightest of spaces in barracks without any opportunity of real withdrawing and without a sphere of privacy. Also a problem. Of course, there was among the POWs all the time the desire to return home, to see the parents, siblings, the beloved ones again. And this was impressed also via publications such as this postcard with Easter greetings. Many soldiers were depressed, some of them suffered severe depressions, and to express their depressive feelings, the soldiers used the term die Stacheldrahtkrankheit, barbed wire sickness. In Camp Nareshino, a small book addressed to the barbed wire sick was issued in 1919. It presents diverse everyday problems of the POWs and shows, for example, the sexual desires of German POWs. So here you can see a poem which mentioned that the German soldiers had to keep the sexual instincts in check. According to the same publication, some German soldiers got also some problems with alcoholism. Yeah? And a particular fear to go, we would say to go gaga, circulated among the POWs in case the soldiers would stay imprisoned for more years. So here, one cartoon, the future perspective in war year 1925, German soldiers still imprisoned. Especially 1919 became a very hard year for the still imprisoned German soldiers. German Reich had ultimately lost the war in 1918. This was an unbelievable and unthinkable news for the German POWs. Many of them felt ashamed about this. Moreover, Wilhelm II had abdicated, unbelievable for the soldiers. News about workers' rebellions in Germany and the establishment of a council republic came in. So the political future had to look for the POWs highly uncertain. And of course, it was a very long time of waiting for the Germans to go home. So one slogan which was issued in the Bando camp newspaper Die Baracke at the end of 1918 was, quote, don't despair and work, quote, end. Generally spoken, were the POWs facing an uncertain future. In January 1920, to end the story here, a month after the signing of the Versailles Treaty, was Bando's camp commander Matsue delighted for the German POWs to congratulate them to their release. The POW's representative in Bando, Kurt Meissner, responded to Matsue in a way based on Beethoven's Ninth Symphony and Ode to Joy, giving thanks on behalf of all Bando POWs with the words, quote, "All men are brothers. We will repeat these words all the time in our hearts. Sayonara," quote end. After more than 5 years of imprisonment, the German soldiers in Japan boarded between December 1919 and the end of March 1920 6 ships to Bremen, Hamburg and Wilhelmshaven. However, some of the German soldiers never returned home. A few just stayed in Japan. Some disembarked on the way to stay in Asia and joined, for example, the Netherlands administration of the Netherlands East Indies. And the very end, what's left in Japan about the German POWs during World War I in Japan. As I've mentioned already, very positive narrative about a very good treatment of the German soldiers during World War I. And the small, it's a town, Naruto, on Shikoku Island, has the former Bando camp as tourist spot on the list. Also, some kind of enthusiasm for soccer has its roots from this time. In January 1919, a soccer match between German POWs of Osaka camp and young Japanese took place. Of course, this was no official friendly match, but it is seen as some kind of the first friendly match between Germany and Japan. And very last point, many things such as German sausages, German bread and so were introduced to Japan. Here, Baumkuchen from Juchheim factory, Juchheim, a former POW, and you can find, and that's the truth, yeah, you can find Juchheim Baumkuchen today in every convenience store in Japan. So, thank you for your attention.